Do you believe in the voodoo? Witchcraft is apparently a real thing now, according to New Zealand, who are continuing along the path of doing exactly what the New Zealand shooter wanted them to do, stoking division and turning their country into a totalitarian state to kind of promote a civil war-esque type scenario. So as you can see here, New Zealand seeks global support for tougher measures on online violence. Online violence being somewhat of a misnomer because it is impossible, as far as I'm aware, to commit an act of violence over the internet. This is, of course, in line with leftist thinking that words equals harm equals violence, as opposed to every other sane person on the planet who seems to realise that equating a mean comment on Twitter with a punch to the face is not something that anyone should rationally do. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, seen here wearing a symbol of oppression all the world over, apart from in the West and parts of New Zealand and Australia, in order to show solidarity with the murdered Muslims. I can appreciate wanting to show solidarity with victims of a massacre. I don't have a problem with that. What I do have a problem with is the symbol that she used, which, as she should know, is used to oppress women worldwide. She's attempting to use the terrorist attack to demand that the biggest internet platforms do more to stamp out violent and extremist content. This cuts out, of course, the fact that the definition of what constitutes extremist content is ever expanding. It never shrinks. When persons like Tommy Robinson are banned from Facebook for being extremist, when most of the clips which come up are of him being attacked or him attempting to do his version of journalism, I do not think that you can accurately say that they are being effective in this. Ms. Ardern will be in France with President Emmanuel Macron, who, let's face it, his attempts to curtail civil disobedience and extremism in his own country have been so successful. To sign an agreement, they crafted the Christchurch Call that asks the social media giants to examine the software that directs people to violent content and to share more data with government authorities and each other to help eradicate toxic online material. Sounds lovely on paper, except of course that we know full well that what the government defines as toxic online material includes things like, let's say in Britain, includes things like posting rap lyrics with the N-word in when you're a white person. That's what you consider to be toxic. It considers violent content, to be fair, to be violent content. However, what it doesn't remove is the double standard which allows violent content by Antifa members, assaults on the public by protesters in political rallies and protests to go uncensored. It also comes up with the fact that there are some hard truths which people should be seeing. There are some things like, shall we call it, the Gilets jaunes protests in France, which could benefit from a little bit more coverage, don't you think? Given that they're in there now, I think it's 28th consecutive week of protest and of trouble in Paris. The accused gunman's use of social media to livestream his rampage in New Zealand and to share a hate-filled manifesto crystallised the vulnerability of internet platforms to extremist and violent views. Well, people need to be able to judge for themselves. This is pure infantilization. The idea that people cannot be exposed to extremist views and identify for themselves what is crazy and what is not. It is the peak of hubris to look at a group of people on the internet and say, I know better than you. I can read this and I can read this and not be affected, but you people, you're incapable. Or worse, I don't want to read this on the internet, therefore none of you should be able to read it. Especially when it comes to something like the hate-filled manifesto, which gives a key insight into the deranged mind of a terrorist, which is a very interesting and useful tool in order to not forget the acts of the past, to find out what radicalized him and identify the underlying issues. As for the live stream, this was a key method by which people have been able to examine the events that happened on that day. People in New Zealand have been prosecuted. Like, I believe one school child is now being convicted, or they're aiming to convict, for 15 years for sharing that live stream. If you're there, it's going on in your school, you're a child, let's think about it like this, and someone says, there's something going on, look at this, and they show you a live stream of the shooting that's going on the other side of the campus, from someone who's terrified, someone who's hiding, who's literally just trying to get the message out, and you as that person is going, oh my goodness, this is an awful thing, I need to share this so people know what's going on, right? That's the sort of mindset that people are going through. No one's going, when there's a school shooting going on the other side of your campus, no one's going, oh yes, let's live share this because I know I'll get lots of views, I know I'll get lots of likes, I'll get lots of love and support from my community, I can score internet points in the gamified world of Twitter. That's not what's going on. It drives me mad. It really drives me mad. The idea that he live streamed his own rampage as well is something which, like, what can you do apart from installing effectively a filter to analyze, like, everyone who's live streaming their birthday, someone who's live streaming a barbecue, someone who's live streaming everything. Like, it's such an invasion of privacy in that way. It is such a disgusting use of the state to invade private life. And I just don't see any way in which this can be achieved. If the price of your security is to make your life a prison, then what is the point? And the terrorists have already won because you're living in a high-stress, anti-freedom environment, which is exactly what they want. They want to rile you, they want the attention and everything. I'm going to ignore the whole, like, meme aspect of the New Zealand shooter for this, but anyway, moving on. Miss Ardern's effort adds momentum to a global push to curb the power of the world's largest internet platforms. The easiest way you can do that, Miss Ardern, is to expand the remit of small companies to come up and compete with the big platforms, as opposed to allowing the largest platforms to crush the competition, or to regulate things so much that there will be no competition for them. Because in this way, you instantiate Facebook as the prime, the monopoly, the only way in which people can interact over social media, as opposed to supporting smaller platforms. I'm thinking things like BitChute here, who want to allow content on their platforms to see whether or not another business model can come up and beat and be more inclusive, in your own words, more diverse. But even as policymakers agree that something needs to be done, I mean, policymakers are always agreeing that something needs to be done. Something always needs to be done. Sometimes nothing needs to be done. He will not divide us. How about that? That's enough of a something that needs to be done. There's little consensus on what to do. From London to New Delhi, governments are drafting laws with differing approaches to regulating the internet. And unfortunately, none of them have got the idea that you need to deregulate the internet, raising concerns in some quarters that the rules may, in some cases, go too far and hinder free expression. Well, they already have, haven't they? I mean, when you're looking at jailing a child for 15 years for sharing a live stream, you are hindering free expression. Miss Ardern has argued that a coordinated global approach is needed. Oh, of course they have. Like, the totalitarian state wishes to be a global, all-encompassing force. The signing of the Christchurch Call was organised around a meeting of digital ministers from the Group of 7 nations this week in Paris. Representatives from Facebook, Google, Microsoft and Twitter are among those scheduled to attend a summit on Wednesday, hosted by Macron and Ardern, saying they would sign the pledge, and Twitter declined to comment because Twitter, out of curiosity, like, as much as people hate on Twitter, and there's good reason to, they do at least seem to be willing to engage. I mean, you see things like Jack Dorsey going on Joe Rogan and responding to people on his own platform, but that's a case of him making noises and not doing anything. But I think it's still a damn sight better than Mark Zuckerberg dictating from on high how Facebook is going to do things. A number of nations are expected to sign on to the non-binding pledge. Well, what's the point of the pledge if it's non-binding? The whole point of pledges is the fact that they're supposed to compel you to do something, not be like, it's like saying, I'm against violence. I'm against poverty. I will pledge myself in a non-binding way to eradicating poverty. Like, it means nothing. It's complete nonsense. But of course, Britain and Canada are in there, as well as surprisingly Jordan, Senegal, Indonesia, Australia, of course, Norway and Ireland, according to officials involved in drafting the accord. The United States is not among the expected signers, and thank God for it. The pledge does not contain any enforcement or regulatory measures, so it doesn't have any guidance on how to do anything. It's up to each country and company to decide how to carry out their commitments, according to the officials involved in the drafting. Basically just an idea of, you may as well have had a cream tea and said, we would like to regulate the internet. We don't know how, because most of us don't use the internet. Most of us are incapable of understanding the nuances of how it works, or what things cause it to flourish, and why it's important, and why free expression, and what the internet is as a public square. But let's move on from that. We share the commitment of world leaders to curb the spread of terrorism and extremism online. Again, maybe the New York Times is the only people who are calling it online violence. Perhaps I'm judging too harshly, but online violence is itself a complete misnomer, as I've said before. The pledge asks for several commitments from technology companies, including robust enforcement of their terms of service. Oh, but they haven't been doing that, haven't they? Because their terms of service are not robust. They're designed to be mutable, they're designed to be malleable, they're designed to be flexible, they're designed so that the company can effectively, in as broad a sense as possible, ban or restrict whoever they want. Reducing the risks of live streaming. The risks of live streaming! There is something called time preference. There is an opportunity cost to clicking on a live stream. Live streams become popular because people want to click on them. Unlike compelled media, something which the government knows all about, the risk to live streaming is only the risk to its own audience, which is self-selecting, and that's their free choice. Sharing research about the software that flags objectionable content. Again, objectionable, such a broad and undefined term. Versions of the gunman's video have remained on Facebook and Instagram since the attacks. Yeah, because people want to see what happened. They want to be connected to the world. They don't want to be wrapped in cotton wool and bubble wrap and have everything about their lives regulated by the state. The social giants must also promise to reevaluate their algorithms. I mean, they do that all the time anyway, so it's pointless. That direct users to extremist content. Yeah, and I agree that they should, but this should be a decision that they come to by themselves and commit to redirecting people looking for extremist material. I don't know whether or not, like, you can tell that someone's been looking for it. I mean, like, a lot of the people who were exposed to the New Zealand shooter video, I'm sure, were not hunting for extremist content. I'm pretty sure they were looking for as much information as possible on this horrendous tragedy that had happened in their community. Instagram has deployed a measure that helps users searching images of self-harm. I think that's probably reasonable from them, but again, it's something that you can only offer. You can offer to help people who are looking at these images, and you will have people, especially people who are in the field of researching self-harm, who will look for these images as well. So you can't just blanket research. You just can't blanket ban the idea of these images. To finish off, Miss Ardern said, "This isn't about freedom of expression, this is about preventing violent extremism and terrorism online. I don't think anyone would argue that the terrorist had a right to live stream the murder of 50 people. Well, only in the sense that no one has the right to live stream. The idea that it's freedom of expression, however, is true. It is technically freedom of expression. It's about preventing violent extremism and terrorism online." Well, he was already going to be a violent extremist and be a terrorist, regardless of whether or not he posted anything online. His only idea was that he wanted to get his manifesto published and to shout as many memes as possible when he was shooting at them. The idea that this stuff helps the debate, that it helps prevent radicalization, the idea that it helps to curb the growth of extremist content online is ridiculous. It is a fallacy, and it will backfire tremendously when people cannot even have a discussion about terrorism online in their own private conversations. Anyways, Thank you very much and have a great week.